One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And there we go. Everything is live and running now. Everything seems to be going smoothly. I have a Mini. We have cameras. Recording seems to be working perfectly. We're streaming on Twitch as well as here. All we need now is paint. All right. So the aim of the day, we're going to paint this ship's captain. And we're going to do some basic highlighting kind of stuff, blue. We're going to paint black again. We're going to do the details on his little newspaper there, his mug, his buttons. We'll do some nice skin tone, and we're going to paint his eyes, of course. And that is the objective of the day. So as you're painting along, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask, right? Just unmute yourself and ask your questions. And I'll be happy to have a conversation with you about painting as we go. And so the way we're going to do this, as usual, I'm going to start by loading up my palette with paints. The objective here, I'm going to try to keep like the paints for the main body, looks like his jacket, paints for his skin, paints for the pants separate on the palette, so I keep the palette well organized. So I'm going to start by, I think we'll do the skin tones across the top. That seems to be the thing that uses the most space. And then jacket in the middle, pants on the bottom, and then once my palette is a huge mess, we'll add the paints in for details. Okay, I just realized I am missing one little thing, which is my eyes. I need some eyes so I can see what I'm doing. And there we go. They're a little bit dirty. We'll give them a quick clean off. I'm at the stage now where I can't even see a miniature clearly without magnifier. So there we go. And now we're pretty much ready to go. Okay. So there's the ship captain. You know, I'm going to move that camera just a slight bit. We'll probably move it again. I'll stop them from rolling so we can just think about what colors we're going to do. Okay. So for the skin tone, I'm going to start with a nice dark purple color, which is going to be burgundy wine. I can't remember if I put this one on the list or not, but I always start with a slightly darker color to create the shadows and depth in the skin tone. This time I'm going to use Reaper's Tan Skin as my main skin tone. This one can be a little bit thin, so just making sure I give it a really good shake. And I'm going to use Tanned Highlight as well as Rosy Highlight to create the kind of the lighter spots in the skin. You don't have to use the same ones, of course. Just whatever skin tone you happen to have lying around. And so this is the tan skin. I probably put way too much on the palette because we're only doing face and hands. This is Tanned Highlight. Nice light color. Do a little bit of Rosy Highlight. And I'm also going to use Creamy Ivory to create my highest highlights. I'm really liking Reaper Creamy Ivory. I have to admit that Vallejo Ivory used to be one of my favorite paints, and I still do quite like it a lot. But by using this Creamy Ivory, which has a really nice consistency, it really works for the style that I paint. Lets me save the Vallejo Ivory for when I really need that extra bit of brightness. So that's the skin tones, and for the jacket and the pants, I'm going to start with Dragon Black. So I'm just going to put a blob of Dragon Black on there, and I'll use that in a couple of places. Now, of course, I did not shake that nearly enough. I just made a mistake. So I'm going to shake this up again. And I'm going to fix my mistake. So how do I do that? I'm going to grab a paper towel. And I am going to lift that paint that I put on the palette right off again. I'm just going to lay the paper towel over it. Going to suck it all up into the paper towel. Because it's mostly just medium, right? It's very little of the pigment came out because I didn't shake it properly. There we go. And that's going to give me something a little bit more effective to start with. Double check the shaking, and now I'm just going to put a blob of black in there. There we go. That's going to work better. The blue for the coat is going to be Templar blue. And I haven't used this one. I think it's a brand new unopened paint so far. But it's kind of a desaturated gray blue. Kind of like a French blue. So give it a good shake, make sure it mixes well. Yeah, it's a little bit gooey still, but that's all right. We'll get it shaken up in time. And to highlight the jacket, I'm still going to use the creamy ivory. And then the next thing is going to be the pants. The pants are basically black. So we are going to use stone gray to highlight the pants. So there's my stone gray. And I'll make the mixtures with the black over here for the pants. And then we're going to use a little bit of snow shadow, one of my favorite colors. We'll use that to highlight the black. And he is going to have kind of shiny boots, shiny shoes. I don't know why I just decided that, but I did. So we're going to give him a little bit of shine on his shoes. So we'll need a bit of dragon white for that. So there's our dragon white. Is that dragon white? Solid white I'm using. Doesn't really matter. Some kind of white. And then what else do we need? I'm going to use some metallics later. The metallics will be for the buttons and the mug. But I think the last thing I need is something for the wood. I'm going to use this green ochre color for the wood in this mug that he's got. There we go. So that is the last one that I need. What are we missing? It's a pretty desaturated looking palette. It's kind of basic looking. But that is... It's a sea captain. He's not like the most boisterous person that you ever met. He might be very boisterous actually, but his personality all comes from his behavior as opposed from his clothing. So we'll have a not too exaggerated looking clothing. And maybe we'll try to give him a bit more of an expression, a bit of brightness on his expression. And that'll be his personality. He's got quite the sneer on the go. All right. I'm going to open up my camera focus now and make sure that we are really well focused on there. And the camera focus, not the zoom, focus. We change it to manual. That's where I'm going to paint. That's looking pretty crisp. If I drift off the screen, or if I go off of focus, please feel free to unmute yourself and say, hey, Geoff, you wandered off the screen. I would rather know than not know. Okay, so that's our plan. We've got our palette organized. I'm going to be using mostly a size 2 brush today. I think I'll do my first few coats with a synthetic brush, just for variety. And I'm still trying to break in this new Series 7 that I've got on the go. So I'm going to use that again today for most of my detail work, unless I really hate it and get fed up, and then I'll switch to something else. Okay. So does anybody have any questions so far? Now, as I said, I intend this to be a conversation, so don't be shy about unmuting yourself and jumping in and asking me a question. I'm happy to take your questions and get rolling. Okay. All right. So the same as we usually do, I'm going to start by putting some base coats on, so that they have a nice long time to dry before we get into doing some highlighting and some shading and stuff on them. So the first base coat I'm going to do is going to be the skin tone. And for the skin tone, I'm going to take that burgundy wine that I put on the palette at the start. And I'm going to mix in a little bit of the tan skin. So it's about 50-50 tan skin and burgundy wine. And this is kind of my shadowy color. This guy's kind of weather beaten. So this is going to be the shadowy color in the background on this. And now I'm going to paint this over all of his hair, all of his skin, in his eye sockets, over his hands. And this is going to be the start point for painting him. So I'm going to start in the back by his ear. And I don't have to be super careful. This is just the first color going on. And what I don't want to do is put the paint on so thick that it obscures the details and it doesn't dry very quickly. Quite often when people are starting out, you put on a layer of paint that is too thick and it won't dry. And then what people start doing is adding lots of water to their paint to thin it. And then they put on too much very, very thin paint. And it also takes a very long time to dry. The ideal sort of balance is to have, when you're starting anyway, is to work on a wet palette. Use a paint which is relatively thin. So that's why I like the Reaper paints for this type of painting, is because they come out of the bottle ready to use, right? Especially for somebody who's not super experienced with paint. And then I don't add any water to it. But what I will do is when I load up my brush, I don't overdo it. I get a little bit of paint on the end, and I'm constantly rolling the tip of the brush in the palette. And I don't bring the brush straight in. I bring the brush in on an angle. And that rolling, as a result, puts the tip on the brush, takes a lot of the paint off the brush, so the brush is not overloaded. And then when I go and put the paint on the Mini, I'm going to do his right hand now. I get a small daub of paint on there, and then I work it with the brush to spread it out. So I'm spreading out that layer to be thin, rather than attempting to put on a layer of very heavily thinned paint. And the reason for that when you're starting out is that thinned paint, particularly thinned with water, can be very difficult to control. So when you touch the brush to the Mini, the surface tension in the water pushes everything out of the brush onto the Mini, and you end up with the flood, the dreaded flood. And the flood is a big frustration, especially if it happens close to the end of your painting. So that's why I recommend when you're starting out, just learn to manage the unthinned paint and paint a thin layer that way, and it'll be more manageable. It will also teach you how to manage the paint for when you start trying to do layering and other techniques where you have to be able to use your brush control to move the paint to where you want it to be. And we're going to do a lot of layering today. Layering is the main focus of the techniques we're going to use today. So there we go. We get that first coat of paint on the Mini. And since this is a paint along, which is, I'm going to do stuff that later on that an intermediate painter might find interesting to watch the way I manage the brush strokes. But for the most part, this is aimed at people learning the fundamentals. So I will mention just about priming versus putting on a first coat of paint. And quite often people are spraying plastic minis with metal primers through a spray can as their first coat of paint. In reality, you don't need to use a primer on the Mini. Now, primer different from paint in the sense that the primer has chemical properties to etch the surface of a metal figure to make a roughness, a tooth as they call it, for the acrylic paint to stick to. So if you're not painting a metal mini, you don't need to use a metal primer through a spray can to get the first coat of paint on. You're better off just to get your first paint, don't thin it with anything, and brush it on, okay, and get used to that quickly brushing on a layer of paint and making sure all the gaps and details get filled in, but with a thin, smooth first layer of paint. And after that first layer of paint has dried and it sticks, every other layer of acrylic paint that goes on top of it is going to stick to it. Okay? And then you avoid all the risks of accidentally having your spray can slightly too close to your mini, or the weather not being right and it gets powdery, and all those other things that happen when people spray plastic minis with spray paint. And Reaper has a whole section in a couple of places to describe the process for preparing your Bones figures. And they don't recommend using primers on the minis. And everybody you meet will say, it worked fine for me, and it may well have worked fine for them at that one moment, that one time, but that doesn't mean it's going to get the same result for everybody. And until you're more experienced, I just recommend avoid the risk of damaging your mini. And instead of thinking of it as priming, think of it as putting the first coat of paint on your mini. All right, so the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to put this green ochre color over the mug. And this is my base for my wood color on this mug. And it's got this little fancy mug here, and I'm going to do it like silver metallic on the little bands. And I'm going to put like a stained wood color on the mug itself. So just as usual, to remind you, the target time for this class, this paint along, I'm going to be painting for about 3 hours. And then there'll be lots of time for questions all the way through. If you find that I'm painting too fast and I'm getting way ahead of you, please tell me and I'll slow down, give you another chance to ask questions. You're welcome to drop a photo into the Discord if you want feedback. And normally when people do that, I pause the recording so that you don't get your minis posted all over YouTube or whatever. So don't feel like anybody's going to, nobody's going to try to embarrass you or anything like that. And then the video will go on YouTube, usually within about a week, unless I make a mistake with the recording, which I do quite often. So I'll do my best to make sure I do that. Okay, the next thing I'm doing, this same color, I'm going to paint his sweater. He's getting like a wool sweater. So I'm painting the neck of his sweater in there inside his jacket. And that sweater is a little bit visible as a cuff by his hand. So I'm going to do a little bit of that by the cuff of his jacket. And we need to make this thing look like a treasure map or a chart or a newspaper or something. So I'm going to start with this ochre color on the map. I don't know what this is. I'll change my mind several more times. Maybe it'll be a map. Maybe it'll be a scroll. Maybe he's a closet wizard. Or maybe it's a wanted poster and or it's a missing persons poster. Maybe he's like an investigator who's trying to track down some sort of missing people. Maybe he's like a character from a Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft style game. So he's trying to find the cultists and rescue people, or maybe he is the cultists and he's trying to find people to take out to sea and give away to the old gods or something. I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go. So there we go. We've got that first coat of paint on the wood. And now I'm going to put a first coat of paint. I think the pants are next. I'm going to grab some black and move it off to the side. So this is like my reservoir of black. The black I'm actually going to use to paint is over to the side. I'm going to paint his pants and his shoes all this same black color. Now, one of the things that's going to happen is all the details you can currently see on the camera are going to become invisible, because the contrast that I put on there earlier with a little bit of airbrush gray will become invisible as the contrast disappears, because the white paint is disappearing. So it'll be harder to see what the pants look like. And that's kind of the same thing that happens to your eye when you just paint things with a single coat of paint and don't shade or highlight. Your eye is not good enough to pick out the slight variations in light and dark that are there when everything's the same color. We really need an exaggerated contrast so that your stereoscopic vision is helped to pick out what the shapes on the miniature look like, which is why we're doing it the way we do it. I think the visor on his cap is also going to be black, so I'll do that now. The little visor there. And I think his C cap here is going to be a dark blue color, like he's maybe a guy from the Merchant Marine or something like that. I don't know. This guy's job changes regularly. There we go. I like it. So now we're going to paint the first coat of paint on his jacket. So for this, the Templar blue is not really dark enough. So I'm going to take about half black, half blue, and I'm going to mix them in the palette. Mix them 50-50. Okay, I heard a beep, but I don't see any comments from anybody. That probably means I'm still have some channels that are unmuted in the Discord. So just give me 1 second to do that. Unmute, no, mute, unmute. So what server is left? Aha. We're going to mute Miniature Monthly. Now, if no, I'm not. Let's just leave that open. We'll have to put up with the beeps, but I want to make sure I don't accidentally cut people off from asking questions. All right, so this mixture of blue and black goes all over his coat. I want this on the collar of his coat as well. I think I might do like the inside of his collar like fleece. Like it's got a little bit of wool or something on there, or fleece. And we'll do that by making like a pebbly, light-colored wool or linen color, like it's kind of yellowed sheep fleece. But for now, we're going to paint the entire jacket this blue-black. Oh, and his hat as well. We'll paint his little sea captain's cap this color. There we go, all the way around. We'll leave the visor black. We'll paint the rest of it blue. I also left that little strip around the bottom of his hat black as well. You know what? Having that red pen in the shot really actually is helping the camera get the colors accurately. I'll have to remember that for future classes, to have that bit of bright color in there. It's going to help in the camera. Okay, so the rest of the jacket. I've got my big blobs of paint on there now. That's way too much paint. So I'm going to just work the paint to smooth it out. Now as I do this, you'll notice that I don't go all over the place and then jump back to the center. I work the edge of this area of paint as it's drying. And that's so that I don't accidentally go back and tear out chunks of partly dried paint. So I'll keep working my way around. And your brushstroke direction is not super critical at this stage. It will be once we get the light direction really set in. But for now, just keep working the edge of the wet paint and don't backtrack. Like, don't go from out in the cuff back into the center of this, because that's when you damage the surface of the partially dried paint. And these Reaper paints dry really, really fast, especially, like, it's fairly warm here in Halifax today. I shouldn't say that it's warm. It's not warm outside, but the heat is on in this building. It's quite warm inside the building, and with the heaters going, it's very dry in here, so the paint is drying very, very quickly. So it might not look like the paint is dry, but it's already partly dry. And then you go back and you end up tearing a chunk of it out, and when it happens, you leave like a divot that's can be very hard to fix. There we go. We're going to keep working our way around. I'm quite excited to be painting this Mini. This Mini, I originally ordered these from Reaper and brought in 10 of them, 12 of them, to do a class for a local gaming shop. And when the first big waves of COVID ended, I asked Reaper for the Minis, and they sent me lots of Minis. And the idea was we were going to do a miniature painting class at every local gaming, like local game store, place they sold D&D and Warhammer and all that stuff. And we got this ship captain. We're going to do it at a store which is on the shore and near some fairly famous fishing towns. And the idea was we're going to paint the ship captain as as a free class to kind of help the store get people coming back in and all that kind of fun thing. Plus, I like meeting people who paint, and it was a good way to meet lots of painters. And we set the date, got everything ready to go, and then a couple of days before the class, I contacted the store to say, okay, I'm going to be there in a couple of days, just want to check everything is good. And they hadn't advertised it. They hadn't told anybody. And they'd scheduled a different event on the same day at the same time. And it meant that, unfortunately, the people in that particular area didn't get their free painting class. Because it's quite a drive. I wasn't going to drive all that way and just hope one person would show up by accident. And that was when I was originally going to paint these. So I didn't get to paint them. And I've had this guy sitting here for almost 2 years. Right? I never got a chance to paint him. So I'm quite excited to get to paint this guy today. And hopefully, because I know all the ones that we had here, people have picked them up to take them home to paint. So hopefully lots of people are painting this guy today. All right, so these base coats are now drying. I would just kind of rotate it in the light a bit, see if you missed any spots. If you did, like I did, I missed a spot in the leg. I just went back and cleaned it up. I missed a spot in the collar. Now that the collar is mostly dry, I'm just going to give that a quick touch up in the spot that I missed. There we go. And this is also where I usually discover that I missed some mold lines. And this is when I would get my knife out and start hacking off the extra mold lines and then correct the damage later. Okay, so that's where we are at now. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to post a photo for us to look at, to have a chat about before we proceed? Oh, look, I missed a spot on the top of his shoulder, too. I'll fix that now. As I said, I'm happy for this to be a conversation. And learn as we go. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, this Winsor & Newton brush is it just doesn't make me very happy. I'm going to keep working with it, keep trying to break it in, but really it's not making me very happy. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, we've got our burgundy wine. So we're going back to working on the skin tone now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the burgundy wine, or whatever deep red or mahogany or color you're using for your shadow on your skin tone. So we previously did a 50-50 mix of our skin tone or tan skin and the burgundy wine to make a shadow color. But now I need to deepen a lot of the shadows, make them much, much darker. So I'm going to grab the burgundy wine, and if you have a fine detail brush or a smaller brush, now's a good time to start using that. And by smaller, I mean really something with a good point. Okay, I'm using a brush which is quite big. This is a size 2. I mean, it's almost as big as the Mini's head. But it's got a very good point on it. Sometimes it has a good point on it. This is the one I'm trying to break in. And what I'm going to do is paint this burgundy wine color in area that I want to have the darkest shadow. So on this guy, that means in his eye sockets, I'm going to fill in his eye sockets with this color. Under his brow, I'm going to do a line of this all along under his cap. And I realize that means that I'm painting a lot of his hair. But that's okay. I don't mind having this color underneath his hair because it will sort of tie everything together. But yeah, definitely the eye sockets filled. Then along the sides of his nose. Sides of his nose. He's got quite a strong furrowed brow. So we're going to put little dots of this on the furrows in his brow on either side. We're going to go under his nose. So there's a shadow under his nose. And he's got these laugh lines that go around the edge of his mouth. So we're going to go right down through those. Almost looks like a bit of a mustache that he's got going on there, but that's not what this is going to be when we're done. I'm going to fill in his mouth with this dark color. And if that means the pipe and the pipe stem there get painted, that's totally okay. And then we're going to do a line of this color around his face where it's kind of framed by his little sideburns there. Both sides. And then the center of each cheek gets this red color. And that's going to give us some nice deep red in his cheek when we're done. Inside of his ears. And then behind his ear and all around, under his chin, under his beard, all the way around his face, where it touches his collar. We want a red line of this dark red between every surface and his head. So all the way around the back of his collar, and also all the way around under his little hat. Why am I doing that? It's so that we have a nice deep shadow where those two surfaces meet. And after I paint his hair, it would be too difficult to try to go back and add the shadow in. So I'm putting the shadow color in at the start, and I'll just not paint over it. And that'll make it easier for me to put the shadows in later. So that's where I am at with his face. He looks very, very dark now. But that's okay. We're going to build up nice bright highlights on that skin all over the place as we go. So now we're going to do the same thing on both of his hands. So as I look at his right hand, remember we got that little piece of yellowy color there. That's the cuff of his sweater. So I'm putting this line underneath that. And then I'm going to outline his hand against the newspaper, map, cultist warning, whatever it is. Do a line around his hand. And then on the back of his hand, there's these sculpted lines. And we're going to put this in between the sculpted lines on the back of his hands to kind of exaggerate those details. And we're going to put this line also between each of his fingers. Again, if this ends up being a little bit messy, it's totally okay. This is just our first bit of shadow on this guy. There we go, around his thumb. Between his thumb and his forefinger. All the way around. There we go. And we do the same thing on his other hand. All around the cuff. Now the back of his hand is not quite as deeply sculpted on this one. We'll still do the same trick. Just bear in mind that on the bottom by the mug, that little bit right there, which is going to be really hard to see on the camera, right there, that thing, is going to be metal. That's the handle of the mug. So we don't need to paint that red, but just bear in mind that that's a detail we want to paint later. Then I'm going to put that line between his fingers and the mug in there like that. I did that a little bit heavily. I'll fix that later. It's not a showstopper by any stretch of the imagination. There we go. There we go. In fact, I'm liking the idea of that mug having some deep red kind of lines in it. So I'm going to make a little bit of a wash out of this burgundy wine color. And I'm going to do that by just taking a little dollop of the paint off to the side, adding a little bit of water into it, and then I'm going to kind of do the inside of the mug and all over the rest of the mug with this very, very thin dark red color. And that's going to make an interesting depth of color on the wood of the mug. There, like that. And it just showed me a whole bunch more mold lines. Look at that. There we go, get that filled in there. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, okay, that's enough of that. So now we're going to let those colors properly dry. So the next step is going to be, we've been letting the skin tone dry, so let's work on his pants next. So for the pants, or his trousers, we're going to take our black and add a little bit of stone gray into it. And I think a little bit, just a little bit of blue. Just a touch. So this will be our first highlight on the pants. Why did I add some blue into it? I don't know. Felt like it needed it. And now we're doing our highlight, so now we really need to start thinking about our lighting direction. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. One would be to light him as so the light's coming from his right behind him. Or maybe he's got the light of the lighthouse coming from beside him. But I think what we're going to do, I think the way I'd like to do it is as though the light is coming at him from kind of, if you look at it from this direction, the main light direction is coming from there. Okay? And it's fairly high up above his shoulders, so it's up here somewhere. And I do that, I mark the base to remind myself of what direction my light is coming from. Because then, once I know that, I can do things like, there's my light direction. Well, there's the shadow he's going to cast. And I will just paint in the shadow. And that helps me to remember what direction is the light source, what direction is the shadow, all those kinds of things. And just as a word of advice, when you go to do this sort of thing and you're painting over sand or basing material on your base, probably not the best idea to use your brand new size 2 Winsor & Newton brush, because that's going to be kind of harsh on the tips. But you can see now, this is my painted in shadow, this is my light direction, and that's going to help me decide where to put the highlights. All right, let's see if this Winsor & Newton brush has been improved or made worse by being dragged over sand. I'm just going to quickly check the other channel to see if there's any questions. Nope. And here we are. So we got black pants. We know the light direction. So what I'm going to do is look for any shapes that kind of have raised areas. And that's where I'm going to put this first highlight. So if we look at this, we look at his left leg first. So it's the right leg on the right from our perspective. Anywhere that I can see there's a raised shape in the pants, like particularly along his inseam, there's like these round raised sections that are going to be closer to the light source. I'm going to put a layer of this lighter colored paint just on the most raised sections of that cloth. And we're just going to assume that this is kind of a basic, cheap pair of matte colored pants or trousers. They're not like super expensive or special, no big, gold embroidery lines down the side or anything like that. Just very simple. The seam for his zipper will get a highlight, and we'll do this now as well on the front, on the right leg. Same idea, and my brush strokes are going from the shadow towards the light. So I pull the brush towards myself with the miniature oriented towards the light. Do the same thing on the outside of the leg. Give it a bit of a highlight down the length of it, because that's all facing directly towards the light source. And that is our first highlight on the front of the pants. Now, the back of the pants, the trousers, you'll be saying to yourself, well, we don't highlight back there because it's in the shadow. And it's the right idea, except that even areas that are completely in shadow, the environmental light bounces around a lot, and it's going to give them a little bit of a highlight. So the shapes will still be visible, but they'll not be as sharply visible or as clear as the material on the front. So we'll give each of these raised areas another little highlight, just like we did on the front. But this back area, we're not going to make this nearly as light as we are eventually going to make the front of his trousers. There we go. And we'll do that on his other leg as well on the back. Just to highlight on the center of those raised areas. There we go. Just like that. Oops, sorry, I drifted a little bit. There we go. There we go. Nothing too complicated there. Now, the next step we're going to do, now that's going to dry really, really fast, okay? So I'm going to grab some of this stone gray, mix a little bit more into my blue-black that we had made. So I'm just going to lighten the mix by adding a little bit of the stone gray, and then I'm going to add some snow shadow, and then I'll just do a little bit of bright white at the end. And that's going to make the highlights on the pants more visible. So this color, not going to be so much on the back, but it's going to be quite a bit on the front. Now, one of the challenges of painting colors like white and black is the more you use a color other than white or black to paint them, the less they look like black and white. So if you're painting black and you paint most of the surface with another color, it stops looking like black. So now these second layers of highlights need to be quite narrow and relatively small. And that's so that we can try to minimize the amount of the pants that are not painted black. They'll start to look like gray or blue or whatever other color. And I just dropped my paintbrush full of paint in my lap. That's pretty normal for me. And as I said, I'm not super happy with this brush. I might ditch it in favor of another one. Pretty much happens every week. I keep trying. I keep working with this brush. And eventually it might break in, but for now it's just not really doing it for me. But it's an expensive brush, and I'm not going to give up on it. All right, so did the highlights on that leg, and you can kind of see them now. And I'll do the ones on the other leg. And again, smaller, narrower highlights this time. Really focused on the top of any raised shapes, like where that crease is down the front of his pants. I'm saying pants, I mean trousers. And that. A little bit more on the side closest to the light. It's one of the funny things about black as a color is it picks up the environmental light a lot more than you might imagine. So we'll keep doing that. We do need to have some illumination on there for it to look proper. All right, there we go. And I think maybe just a little bit on the sharpest edges on that side of his leg. Doesn't need very much. Maybe that sharp edge there. And then as we make our way around right to the back of the leg, barely any highlighting at all. I think on this leg at the back, maybe just a touch on that zone there. And it's like a little bit of a bulge on the back of his calf muscle. I'll give that a little bit of a highlight too. And every time we do one of these classes, I say to myself, and that's enough. But then the next time I come around, I'm like, no, I think we need a little bit more. So we'll see how much I fall victim to that idea today. And I'm going to go back to my stone gray again, add it into my mix, make another lighter mix, lighter highlight color, reload my brush. Now at this point, some of you may be like, why isn't he cleaning his brush out? And the reason I'm not cleaning it out is because it really hasn't dried out on me. There's quite a lot of volume held in this brush, and the paint's not drying out, so I'm just going to keep working with it. If I go and wash my brush now, we'll do that. Clean the gray out and all that. Check the tip is good. Yep. And now I go and reload my brush with paint. But there's actually quite a lot of water still in that brush. Okay, and you quite often have a little bead of water on the bottom of it that'll come off. And when that water gets into the brush, whatever paint you've got in there gets pushed out. And this is where we get the flood from. We clean the brush, reload, and suddenly the paint floods. So if your brush is not drying out, you don't need to keep washing and reloading. Just keep working with it. If it does start to dry out, yeah, wash it out, reload with fresh paint. Just be cautious about not about having too much water in the brush because of that effect of pushing the paint out. All right, so now I'm going to do these highlights all again. Front of the pants first, starting with the same left leg again. And these are going to be very, very small. Focused on the front of the leg, just the highest edge of those creases and shapes. And it's on the raised surfaces, not in any of the low spots. I'm going to keep the paint on the raised areas and on the side pointing towards the light source. Now, we start making these highlights too big, the pants start to look like they're gray instead of black. When they get to be too big and it stops looking like black, what do? Well, we can go back in and reapply the black as a glaze, or we can manually paint in slightly darker shadows, and that'll help to make it start to look like black again. It's not looking too bad though. These ones are just a little bit on that zipper, and then these raised areas. Oh, look at that, a hair fell right off the end of the brush. I don't know if you can see that, but a bristle just broke out the end of the brush. We'll clean that up, and we'll keep going. This is the stone gray with black, and we had done most of the left leg and the right leg, but now we're doing the second half of the right leg. And previously my brush strokes were going in the direction from like dark to light this way, but now I'm going to turn them around the other way and do my brush strokes in the other direction, so that anywhere the brush strokes overlap in the middle, like there, is where my brightest highlight is going to be. And that's going to help create like extra bit of contrast. It's going to help me get nice strong highlights without the mini suddenly looking like he's gray. There we go. And we'll do that little bit there. The front of his pants gets a little bit of a highlight. A little bit on that cuff. There we go. Now, this is where if you were to start making these highlights quite rough, like make dots and dashes instead of smooth brush strokes, that's going to make his trousers look weather beaten and rough, as opposed to being like finely pressed and smooth. And in my mind, this guy is more of like the guy Jack from, is it Jack? The guy from Jaws who's the ship's captain, right? Like he's pretty rugged sort of character. And so he's not smoothly pressed. He's weather beaten, he's battered, endures the elements, knows his way around a ship and around the ocean. The kind of guy that when you pull into the dock, kind of looks at you scowling through one eye and is like, "What are you doing on a boat, landlubber?" But if you ask for his advice, he's happy to give it and has tons of experience and was willing to help you. There we go. So now we've got some nicely highlighted pants. And this is the part where I say, do we think this is light enough? Well, the answer is no. We're going to go lighter again. So this time, I'm going to grab that stone gray. I'm not going to mix anything into it. I'm just going to use it straight. Not thinned again, still just working the paint, rolling the brush in it to smooth it. And I do all those highlights again, but really focused towards the light direction. Remember, there's our light direction. So the highlights are going to be closest to that direction, and they're going to be as small as I can manage them. Just tiny little lines to show where the light is most focused and reflected. Now, if his pants are really weather beaten, they might have salt crust on them. They might be covered in fish guts or who knows what. And so they might not just be straight black. They might look quite faded and gray. But I'm not too concerned about that idea at the moment. We're just focused on giving them trousers that are well highlighted. So I think that's enough on that leg. I'm not going to be too worried about that zipper. It's kind of under the shadow of his coat. And then we'll do the one on his other leg. And this one gets a little bit brighter highlight because it's closer to our light source. But again, we still want quite small, contained highlights, so we don't lose the impression that we're looking at an object which is black. There we go. I started drifting again. You guys are supposed to tell me when I'm drifting. I remember my first time trying to learn to sail, and was on the little sailing boat, and out in Halifax Harbor, and came around, and I was not ready. I was standing up too high, and the captain had told me to get down on the deck, and I wasn't fast enough, and the boom swept around and got me right in the back of the head and knocked me flat. I'm pretty sure that I've never recovered from the brain damage. Actually, this doesn't sound very funny, does it? But I got a good knock in the head from that one, let me tell you. All right, I'm now going to go back to using the snow shadow. I think I'm just going to use the snow shadow straight now. And this is going to be quite a jump from the stone gray. It's going to be quite a bit lighter. But I'm going to use a little bit of this to make a few highlights on the pants, really where the creases are sharpest. And that is going to be kind of just below his knee on the left side, right in there. There's a little spot where there's like a triangle point of folds come together. The front edge of that little bit of his shin. The edge of the pants above his shoe. And maybe just one or two along those folds there. That's enough. And then on his other leg, we do the same thing, but maybe just a little bit more. So front of his leg, there's a bit of a stronger crease. So how about you guys that are out there painting? Anybody else have that lovely experience of trying to learn to sail and the old sea salt told you to duck and you took a smack in the back of the head? Certainly where I live, that's a pretty common occurrence. People trying to learn to sail and struggling. One of my cousins is a sailing instructor. Her dad actually is a boat builder, builds wooden boats, schooners and things like that he's worked on. Does boat restorations. All right. So now I mix some white into that snow shadow. I'm going to do the same highlights one more time later. Yeah, no worries, Glass Casket. I'll do my best to get it uploaded by the end of the week. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you next time. So those previous light highlights that I did, I'm going to put this sort of light white color that I just made in just a couple of them where the light might be strongest reflected. And having this additional very, very light highlight, we want to be careful not to make it like too much, because then it'll make everything look shiny. But by having things go almost all the way to pure white, okay, it makes everything else look darker by comparison. So the pants seem darker because of having those very, very light highlights. And that's going to be helpful to our final look. So now we need to do something similar on his shoes. He's just got the tips of those shoes showing. So I'm going to use straight stone gray first. And I'm basically just going to make like a little round highlight on the tip of his shoe on each side, facing in the direction of the light source. His toe of his shoe is a bit of a round shape, so I'm making a round highlight. So straight stone gray, and that's going to dry almost instantly. I'm going to load it with straight snow shadow and put a highlight right in the center of those previous two. But smaller. And then I'm going to clean my brush off and go back and I'm going to use this solid white or pure white or dragon white, whatever you're using. Not thinning it at all, not mixing it with anything at all. And I'm going to put a highlight right in the middle of that snow shadow highlight. And that's going to make his shoes look shiny. Now later in this process, we might decide his shoes shouldn't be shiny, and we can put mud and dirt and grit and whatever on them. But for now, he looks like he has polished shoes. And I'm feeling pretty happy with that. That's looking mostly black. And the next stage is going to be to do a glaze of black over that. But for now, I'm going to let it dry for a while. Okay? So now we are going to do the next layer of skin tone. Okay, and I'm going slowly and carefully on the skin tone because I want to give it lots of time to dry between each step. And this because if you do the damage to the paint on this face or on the skin, it's really obvious. It won't be obvious on the jacket, but on his face, if there's a big chunk of paint missing, it'll be really obvious. So we're going to go slow and carefully with the skin tone. Do each layer, let it dry. Do each layer, let it dry. All right. So I'm just using the tan skin tone, and you can use whatever skin tone you're using. And now, knowing that my light is coming from this direction, the highlights that I'm going to put on his face, okay, are going to be stronger facing towards the light source. So as I look at it now, I can see like his cap is shadowing his face, but the edge of his brow, above his right eyebrow, is going to catch a bit of the light. So I put a bit of light skin tone up there. It's going to catch that knot in the middle of his forehead. It's going to catch that whole side of his nose is going to be this color. But I want to be careful not to fill in his eye socket with this color. We want to keep that eye socket dark. And then as I look at his face, he's got these lines. He's got one line that comes down as a laugh line. So I'm going to put a line of paint on that. I'm going to put some paint on his cheek. And you may find that this looks kind of chalky, and that's going to be okay. He's going to be a weather-beaten old salt. It doesn't need to look perfect. And now we're going to do his upper lip. And we're just going to dab a little bit of paint on where the Cupid's bow there is under his nose. Okay. And along the right side of his upper lip, we'll dab some of that on there. What I don't want to do is change the color of his lower lip. We're going to leave that this darker skin color for now. But I do want some paint on his chin. So I'll do a little bit of paint. Start in the shadow and pull it towards the light along the outside of his chin. And that's going to be enough to start with there. And then on the other side of his face, away from the light, I'm just going to do a daub of paint on the side of his nose, like his nostril has got a highlight. And then I'm going to put a little bit of paint, try to line it up with the other side of his face, under his eye. But really right at the top of his cheek, not everywhere. And that's because his nose is going to be casting a shadow. And then we want to highlight the top of his ear if we can see it. I'm not convinced I can see his ear. I think that right there might be his ear. But it's like the lower lobe of his ear lobe. And then I think the next thing to do is the other ear. Now I've got dried paint on the tip of my brush. I'm going to clean that off before I go any further. If you can see that there. So I will pluck that bit of paint off. You can see it right there on my fingertip. Right there. And that little dollop of paint was stopping the paint from flowing on my brush. It's almost invisible on the camera. There it is. You can see it right there. So if you get that dry tip, just pause, gently remove it with your thumbnail, carefully clean your brush, get the excess water out, and then reload with your paint and carry on. So I've reloaded with the tan skin. All right. And I'm going to do that earlobe again. Oh, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the beeping. So all I'm doing is I'm redoing a couple of these highlights with the same color again, just to make them a little bit stronger. There, that's more like what I wanted. And now I'm going to do his hands. Load up the brush. I'm going to look for his right hand first down here. And I'm going to do the top of his hand above the little rolled paper there. My brush strokes are coming from the shadow out towards the light side. And I'm going to paint basically the whole back of his hand, but try not to completely cover those shadows we did. And we'll do like a double layer on right on the top of his knuckles. They're going to stand out. And we'll do his fingers individually. So I'm going to look at his fingers from underneath, and my brush stroke's going to start on the tip of his finger and pull forward towards his knuckle. What that's going to do is leave a lot of his finger shadowed, but with like a double extra layer of paint on top of the knuckle. which is going to make those knuckles extra bright and really stand out. And I have no doubt that this guy has thrown a few punches. Maybe he's punched out the occasional shark at sea, or he's starting to get the feeling like that this guy would be the kind of person that would help somebody escape from the cultists rather than actually be one of the cultists himself. So we're going to give him a bit more of a positive air. There we go. Just do a little bit of a touch up on the back of the hand. And that little dried tip of paint is back. Remove it. Reload. Keep going. Do the other hand. So we do the back of the thumb. We'll do each of the fingers separately from this angle. There we go. Kind of the palm of his hand. And then we're going to do the back of his hand, but not paint that little handle on the mug. There's the handle on the mug. So we're going to paint around that. Just paint the back of his hand. And then on the back of his hand, we're going to do really just focus on the knuckles for the most part. This side is in shadow, so we don't need to do too much extra work. And just kind of fill it in a little bit. Now you can see I made a mistake there. That's the kind of thing you can either just rub off with your finger, rub off with another brush, or just not worry about and cover it over later when you start doing highlighting. Little mistakes like that, no big deal. All right, there we go. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a layer of tanned highlight. Now, on my palette, it's all starting to separate it out. I'm going to give it a little mix. And I think this might be a bit of a big jump from the tanned skin to the tanned highlight. But I'm just going to roll with it, and I'll use a glaze later to smooth it out if I feel like I need it. But for now, we're going to just do a big jump and go to the next highlight. And these ones basically go all in the same spots, but smaller and facing towards the light. So like on the edge of his eye, we're going to get that little bit of his eyelid. Now, if you're a beginner, you might not have the brush control yet to hit those things precisely, but it's always worth just giving it a try, because that's how you develop the control, is by practice. And we all make a lot of mistakes as we're painting, and that's how you learn. You've seen me make mistakes already in this paint along. Cupid's bow, top of his lip, the edge of his chin. Start in the shadow side and pull out towards the light on his chin. Tip of his nose, bridge of his nose, that knot between his eyes, eyelid. Now where he's got that brim of his hat kind of shadowing everything, we want to make everything on the upper part of his face a little bit lighter than we normally would, so that it's still visible even with the natural shadow that the brim will cast. So we just make that a little bit lighter than the areas below it. And keep in mind that it's going to have a natural shadow, so we might need to do a few little sort of superpower highlights there. So highlighting the top of his cheek by his eye, a little bit of that laugh line, tip of his nose. There we go. Now we're going to do his right hand. So we're going to do the back of his hand. Back of his hand close to his knuckles. We don't have to be quite as careful this time because we've already got those shadows there. And they're going to show through this color even if we make a mistake. So we can just be a little bit less cautious there, and that's going to make it look a little bit more natural. And I'll do the fingers the same way as before, pull from the shadow up onto the knuckle, but a much shorter brush stroke this time, not doing all of the fingers all the way down into the shadow this time. That's going to look a little bit more natural. There we go. And on the opposite hand, not too worried about the shadow side anymore. I'm just focusing on the light side. So top of his hand, top of his thumb, the top knuckle where the light might catch it. Back of the thumb. And then those fingertips that are through the mug handle. I'm going to give those a little bit of a highlight and a little bit on the palm of his hand. There we go. So those features are being quite strongly defined now. Let me clean off my brush. Oh, got somebody else joined in. That's awesome. All right. So we're going to keep working on the face now. And so now I'm going to jump up to the rosy highlight. You know what? I'm fed up with this brush. I'm going to switch into another brush. That one has lots of hairs that keep flopping off to the side. This one has a much narrower point. It's a well broken in brush. It's been doing good work for me, so I'm going to swap over to this one instead. Okay, so now I'm just going to give it that rosy highlight. And again, this could be too big of a jump. Quite often when I'm painting skin, I'll do half steps or more in between colors. But for today, I want to do slightly bigger jumps, make them look a bit more rough and rugged and craggy. And so this color is going to be, this is the second lightest color we're going to use at this stage. So noting my light direction, all right, light's coming this way. And I'm looking at him. So the parts of his face that are going to get this, I can say that a little bit of the bottom of his earlobe might get this color, just a little bit, right at the bottom. Don't worry if you hit the beard a little bit. We're going to paint that gray in a minute. The outside of that eyebrow right there, it's very well sculpted. His raised brow right there. We want to do, again, that knot in the middle of his forehead. In fact, you can now see there's kind of a double knot going on there. Okay, so he's got a really wrinkly, furrowed brow. We want to do the nostril on this side, gets its own distinct highlight. Okay, like that. And then we're going to do his craggy, broken nose. We'll do the ridge of his nose. But focus more on the side towards the light than on the dark side. Okay, focused on the light side. A bit of craggy, broken nose. The tip of his nose. It's going to be very distinct looking features. Okay, and now we need the top of his cheek. Nice round highlight there, almost up to his eye, but don't cover over that shadow we've got going on below his eye. And that laugh line there, we want to highlight that one. And upper lip. We're still not messing around with that lower lip. We want to leave that alone. He's starting to look a bit like Andre the Giant to me. Maybe this is Andre the Giant's dad, who was on the docks in Greenland, teaching people how to sail ships or whatever, how to make pickled herring and do all that stuff, how to dry fish. There we go. He's starting to have some character now. I like it. Oh, I love it. All right. So now you do a little bit of this color on the back of his hand. Really going to focus on just on his knuckles. So there's one knuckle. There's another one, another one, another one. Really focused on those. And we're going to do add some red color later around there, so it's going to be battered looking. On his other hand, we're going to hit the top of that knuckle. Maybe just one or two little dots on those fingers, that palm, just to make sure it's really visible. There we go. Oh, yeah. I love it. Okay, and then we are going to go one level lighter again. Now, we're going to go to the creamy ivory. Get a nice load up of that on the brush. And now this is going to make him look kind of pasty and chalky. That's just kind of what happens when you get to the highest, lightest colors. And that's one of the reasons we don't really want to thin the paint. That makes the chalkiness worse. So we're going to do this highlight, and it might look a little bit pasty, make him look a little bit dead. But we'll add some red in to give him some more warmth. So I'm hitting all those same highlights again. These are meant to be really, really small highlights. Same laugh line, same nostril, tip of the nose, bridge of his nose, all those same spots. I'm going to do one little dot of light on his opposite cheek, just so that it, like the light is shining across. Okay. I don't think this guy was unemployed in Greenland. Love it. All right, a little bit on the outside of his chin. Hope you guys don't mind the Princess Bride references. It's like the favorite movie in our house. The Princess Bride board game and everything. All right, a little bit on the back of that knuckle, back of the fingertips. And on the other hand, tiny little ones on each knuckle. There we go. Now we're starting to see this fella clearly. Very good. All right. I feel like that lip color is not very good. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to grab a red. Now, what have I got for red on my desk here? I'm going to grab blood red. That's the first one I found. Okay, it doesn't really matter what red you're using, but the burgundy wine color that I started with, that's a red violet. So what I'm really looking for now is actually like a primary red. Magenta would be excellent. I just didn't grab one, but most people have sort of a basic red. So blood red, Reaper blood red is a good one. And what I'm going to do with this now is I'm going to mix some of this blood red with the burgundy wine, just a touch of burgundy wine. No, more burgundy wine. There we go. So I get a more of a reddish color. And this is, I'm going to redo his lower lip with this reddish color. And it's going to make him look a little bit warmer. Okay? A little bit more alive. His tongue is all, I think it's his tongue. I can't tell if it's his tongue or his teeth. It's a little bit visible in there. Now, yeah, I think it's teeth. Or maybe it's just gums. I don't know. So the main thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to get his lower lip with this color. And to get the lower lip, I orient the brush, or the miniature to the brush. And basically, I'm going to come in on an angle like this and lay the brush down and put a line like that on his lower lip. Okay, so I'm just going to lower it in, put an oval on his lower lip, and then lift the brush off. If my paint doesn't flow very well, I might wiggle it a little bit. But the aim is not to put a lot of paint on there. It's just to kind of catch the central part of the lower lip. Give it a little bit more of a warmer color. Make it stand out a little bit. Now, if you're feeling really brave, and if you don't have a very good pointed brush, I don't recommend trying this. I'm going to reach right in there. And I'm going to put a dot of this same color on his tongue. There we go. That was probably a little bit too much. I did it anyway. It's a done deal. Now what I'm going to do, because I don't want him to look like he's wearing lipstick or something. What I'm going to do is grab the, go back to my tan skin tone. Just going to work it a little bit. And I'm going to put a highlight of this over the red that I just did. So that red is going to tint this color slightly. And it's going to look more like kind of an adult, weather-beaten old dude's skin rather than like a teenager's lipstick, which is kind of the way it looks now. And this highlight just goes in the center of his lip to kind of push that red into the background a little bit. There we go. Now, if I was painting, you know, some kind of an elven princess or something, I might add a bit of a lighter color again to make it look like her lips were moist or something, or wet, make sure like her lips were wet. But this crusty old dude, I'm not doing that. I'm going to leave him looking kind of beat up. Okay? Now, the big challenge is going to be this guy's eyes. Now, they're pretty well sculpted, but the right eye is better sculpted than the left eye. The left eye has a little bit of a defect in the cast. And so his cheek and the lower eyelid have kind of become a little bit of a socket more than they should be. And as a result, I've got a bit of a messy looking eye socket. So I'm going to go in there with black now. And I'm just going to paint just the eye socket straight black. And that's to make sure I have an oval-shaped eye socket in which to paint my eye. And I think for this guy, we'll go back to our favorite eyes for these paint-alongs, which is the two-step eye. Step 1 is paint the eye socket black or a very dark color. Step 2 is to paint the whites of the eyes. And that's it. When I say we paint the whites of the eyes, we leave this black color to be the iris. Okay, so it's not that we're just painting the whole white of the eye. We are leaving this black to be the iris. So what I'm going to do is I need a sort of a different color from his skin tone. I need a light color to be the color of his sclera, as it were. So I think in this case, I'm going to mix a little bit of pure white and a little bit of that snow shadow. Now this is already on my palette at the bottom. This was one of the highlights for the black. I'm just going to make a fresher mix of it. And I'm going to use that to paint the whites of his eyes. And it'll contrast with his skin tone. You could always just use the creamy ivory. That's not a bad color for this as well. And now, if this was his eye, right? Essentially what I'm doing is I'm just going to reach in and put a dab of paint in the corner of his eye to be the white of his eye. And I'm leaving the rest of it unpainted. Okay? Leaving it as the color that is right now, which is black. So for this eye, I'm going to reach in and I'll put a dot of paint in the left corner of his eye. So it's the right, left from my perspective, right from his perspective. But I'm not painting the whole eye this color. Now, I don't know if you can see what's happening, but my paint has already dried on me by the time I got there. So I actually need to redo that. I'm going to put a tiniest touch of water into this paint. I don't know if I've mentioned already, but it's very dry in here right now. And I'm going to get paint that flows better. And I'm going to redo that dot. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay, so there's one of the eyes done. And I'm going to do the other one. So he's looking off over his right shoulder at some guy he's thinking about giving a thumping to. He's like, did that kid just get hit in the head with the boom? Oh my God, what a landlubber. All right, so there he is. He's looking askance. He's looking at those people thinking, jeez, they need 3 or 4 more beer before they try to sail again. Maybe 3 or 4 more rums before they sail again, right? Okay. I'm liking it. So now I'm going to do his hair. No, I'm not going to do his hair. I'm going to put a little bit more red in his face. So how do we do that? Our tan skin tone is our main face color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that tan skin tone and I'm going to put a daub of that red in it. And it's going to make this gross looking pink color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this into the lower part of his cheeks, between his mutton chop sideburns and his kind of the orbs of his cheeks there, his raised cheekbones. And what this is going to be is just like little dots of red, just tiny little bit of it, like he's had a few drinks, And he's feeling like he's going to go tell that landlubber from New York City who just got hit in the head with the boom on the ship. He's going to give him what for. He's going to explain the ways of the world to him. Put a little bit around his eye socket, just for no reason at all. Put a little bit around the inside of his nose, close to his eye. But the idea here is just to add a little bit more red tone. To make him look like he's a little bit got a little bit more character in his face. There we go. Now that looks pretty rough, and that's okay, because now I'm going to cover that up with a glaze. Oh, I forgot to do it on his knuckles. That was my other plan, was to do that on his knuckles. So you tend to have very reddish colors on your knuckles, and that's what we're going to do with this color. We're going to kind of dab it around each knuckle, like his knuckles are weather beaten, and they're kind of yellowy white in the center, where because he's gripping that wanted poster or missing poster, whatever it is, the knuckles are looking white where the bone shows through. We can put a little bit of detail on the back of his hand with this color as well if we want, just to kind of liven things up a little bit. We don't normally want to do that on the palm of the hand. We could, but we could put some maybe under there, like kind of like along the edge of the palm where it's creased. And we can definitely dab some of this on the back of his hand, around his knuckles, same way as we did on the front. And that's going to add a little bit more color variety. You don't want to just paint the whole thing this color. We're talking about a very, very small amount. Just dabbed here and there in creases, around knuckles and joints, like he's got some real blood flowing there. He's not just a doppelganger or something with no warm blood. I'm going to put a dot of this right in the middle of the center of each ear, where the blood would be more, not on the edge of the ear, right in the center. There we go. Now he's looking a little bit more like the ship's captain we've come to know and love. But as I said, that looks a bit rough. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to glaze the skin mid-tone over it. Now, before I do that, I'm going to slow down for a minute. I'm going to pause. All right, so now we've had a good chat, and that skin tone is dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my my tan skin, my mid-tone skin tone. I'm going to make a glaze out of that. So I grab a bit of the paint, move it off to the side, and I'm going to put quite a bit of water in that, like 2 or 3 times as much water as paint. And what I'm going to do is I'm not just going to slather this all over the place. I'm going to apply it in a controlled manner. And I don't want to have the brush overloaded, so I load up the brush with my wash. If I just put that on the Mini now, I'm going to get a flood. There's the flood. That is way, way, way too much paint. So I'm going to put that back in the brush. Back in it goes. Now, with my loaded paint in my brush, I'm going to go to from my palette to my paper towel and just touch the edge of that on the paper towel. And a lot of that's going to go out, but the brush is still loaded with the thinned paint. Okay? Come back and look at my thumbnail. When I just put that on there now, I don't get very much paint. But if I put that brush across there in a wide, slow brush stroke, it is actually applying a very thin layer over that whole area. Now, wherever I lift the brush along this edge, more paint is deposited. But as this is drying, I don't know if you can see it because it's so close to my skin tone, but this whole zone is becoming darker. See that whole zone there has this paint over it, and it's tinting the skin underneath to look closer to this paint color. So what we're going to do now, we're going to put the glaze over his face and his hands. All right. So we're going to do A little bit of a glaze over this face, and we're going to start on the raised part where it's lighter, and we're going to pull the brush down into the pink and into the side of his beard. And that's going to kind of smooth out the overall look of our skin tone, okay? So I'll start him close to his nose, pull out across his cheek, and then down into his beard. And if I get too much, I can just gently, slowly move the brush across, and it'll pick up the excess. Now, why did we do it so thin? It's because if we put too much on, it's harder to fix. But if we don't put enough on, we can always go back and add a little bit more of that color and get the effect that we're looking for. This is why we also waited to do the beard, because we can use the beard to fix if we get too much paint and just ends up in a pile. When we fix the beard, we paint the beard, we can fix that. Okay. There we go. Like that. And as that dries, it smooths out a lot of those little dabs of pinkish paint that we did to give him that ruddiness in his face. That's going to make him look a lot better overall. I'm going to do that on the back of his hand as well. Just rub it across there slowly. And on his other weather-beaten hand. And on the back of that hand. There we go. Okay. Just a thin layer at a time, and you can see as it dries, makes everything look quite a bit smoother, a lot more realistic. There we go, and we got a nice clear look on his face. He's definitely looking over there saying, "You folks, what are you up to over there?" I like it. Okay, so you guys keep working on that for a moment, and I will be right back. So by now, the skin tone should be nice and dry and should look pretty good. I'm really happy with the way that looks. I'm really happy with the way that looks. So the next thing we're going to do, let's do his hair and get that stage done. So the hair is going to be this stone gray color. And what I'm going to do is, we've already got that mix we made down at the bottom for the black. I'm just putting a little bit more of the stone gray in it to freshen it up, if you will. So it's a little bit darker than stone gray, but not much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do little lines of color, a little bit at a time. And I basically paint all of his hair this color. So I'm going to start by his right temple, left side from our perspective, and just do little lines. And I'm not really concerned about making it perfect. I want it to have a bit of an irregular look, because he's an old dude on the waterfront. You know, he's weather beaten, so I'm just going to make it with little dashes and dots. And I'm not going to go all the way out onto his chin. I'm just going to do like an arc around his face. And then I'm going to start going the other direction with the hair. And we want to be careful. Oh, we haven't painted his hat or his coat yet, so we don't have to be that careful. We do want to be a little bit cautious. Certainly want to be careful not to get this on his skin, but you don't have to be too careful about getting it on his coat. What I don't want to do is totally fill in this red color with the gray. I want that dark color to still be visible. So just a few little dots and dabs and lines as we work our way around, so that we don't lose the depth of color that we've achieved. Okay. Now, I'll just warn everybody that it's getting to be 5 o'clock here on a Sunday afternoon, which means that all the families that have been out and about doing their family drives and such, they do tend to stop in here on their way home. So we may get another half dozen or so visitors in the next hour, and I apologize for that, but that helps keep the doors open. So we're going to welcome them in. We also have a big sale on the go at the moment, so that's why lots of people are coming in, certainly more than usual. There we go. And if I really wanted to, I could put some of this as like an eyebrow I don't really feel super keen on it. I'll just do a little bit of a dab there. Sure, there we go. Now, that's not enough to really highlight his hair. So now I'm going to go to this straight stone gray. And just on the side towards the light direction. Remember, there's our light direction. Without too much paint on the brush, I want to do really, really small dabs. Again, dabs and lines. To pick out the hair in his beard on the side towards the light. Doesn't need a lot, just a little bit. To kind of pick it out. And because he's an old dude and he's all weather beaten, it doesn't have to be perfect. But again, we don't want to completely cover what we did in the previous step. We just need a little bit. And it does not have to go all the way around. We're focused on the light side. Okay, focused on the light side. There he is. Now I think we need a little bit on his other temple, just to give it some shape. Not too much, just a little bit. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. That is enough as far as I'm concerned. Now, if we want it to be really sophisticated and make him look really grizzled, so let's do it. We could take a little bit of the blue that we used for the main color on his jacket. Okay, that's the main jacket color. And I'll put it off up by all my other washes along the top there. And I'm going to make a very, very thin mix of that blue. Like really thin, much thinner than the previous one we did. Now this is not essential, right? This is me kind of playing a little bit. But what I was going to do is give him a bit of an old man's beard, right? So when you look at a face, right, the bones are quite visible at the top. You got more blood and muscle visible through the skin across the middle band. And then particularly on a guy like this where his chin is shaved but the rest is not, he's going to have a bit of a bluish 5 o'clock shadow. So I'm going to just glaze a tiny little bit. You can see there's barely any paint there. Almost like dirty paint water. I'm going to do that on his chin. And I'm going to pull it downwards. So I'm going to start up and pull down across his chin towards the shadow. And when that dries, it's going to make things look a little bit bluer. And I don't want to go above his mouth. I want to start right by that laugh line and pull downwards towards the shadow. And as that dries, it's going to blue. It's going to darken. And it's going to make him look like he's a little bit unshaven and a bit dirtier. And I like it. That's going to make him look even more realistic. A little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow on the go for him. Okay, that's enough of that. And I think that face is done. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is the coat. Oh, I am not in the channel. Let me make sure I go back to the right channel. There we go. Okay. I'm assuming everybody can still hear me. Everybody seems to be... All right. So for the jacket now, that blue that we used for the first step of the coat, for the coat, okay? I'm going to take more of that same Templar blue that we were using and just add it into the mix. And that is going to be my first highlight color for the jacket. Now it doesn't seem like very much of a step, and it's not, but it's enough for this dark jacket to start to show a highlight. And I'm not concerned about the effect we were looking for in the pants. We want it to still look black. So I can make these highlights pretty big. Okay. I just do not want to completely cover over the previous layer. So I look at the front of his jacket where these raised shapes are. And on the side of them closest towards our light source, I'm just dabbing the blue paint on top of those raised areas irregularly in the direction facing towards the light source. Why am I doing it irregularly? Because in my mind, this coat is kind of like an old dense wool or felt seafarer's coat. And it's going to be a little bit like when wool gets damaged, it gets like a pilling effect. And that's how I view this coat. It's very, very battered. So I don't mind it having a sort of a dotted pattern. In fact, you could just do this all with dots if you wanted to, and it would work. Now, a lot of people, some of the photos that I looked at of this guy had painted this like it was an oil slick or a heavy leather jacket. An oil slick would be fine, or slicker, right? Which is it's a cloth jacket which has got a water repellent oil in the fabric. Okay, oilskin. And it is usually a very dark brown color, and it's a little bit shiny, but basically the water beads off of it and flows off of it. It's kind of an old style of raincoat. They smell terrible. My dad used to have one in the basement, but quite warm, reasonably waterproof if you take good care of it. And that would be a good choice for this guy as well, but I was really going for the classic sea captain in a blue coat. So I'm just dabbing this blue color on those raised surfaces to create the highlights. Not being super careful. I do want to be sure to do the bottom of the collar. Again, just on the raised areas, not the whole thing. Across the back of his shoulders. Okay. Oh, sorry I've drifted. Sorry I drifted. There we go. I'm back. Hitting these raised zones. There we go. He's starting to appeal to me even more, this guy. Once I decided he looked like Andre the Giant. I can see him in, the dark nights on the wharf, telling stories about sharks and sea monsters, and all the old sailors that are there telling of the horrible things they've seen and the stories of the deeps and the dark, and him being like, "Ah, lad, yes, it's so dark in the deeps, but you're home safe now. Have another rum." "Arr, yar," she says. Sorry. When I paint, I tend to talk to the minis. It's one of my favorite things to do. It brings out personality and tends to influence how I see the mini. Especially once I've painted the eyes and I got the face mostly done. The miniature definitely starts to talk to me, and I can learn even more about their history. And I do think this guy, if he heard those dark tales about creatures of the deeps and cultists stealing people from their beds at night, he would be the kind of guy who'd be like, "Arr, yar, we'll be raising a team to go find him and bring him back. I pity the cultist who steals a girl from our town." All right, so I'm just adding a little bit more blue in there. I think somebody on Twitch is telling me to shut up. Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. We are chatting on Discord too. There we go. All right. So the person on the chat as well. And now we're going to go back to making sure we can see everybody on the Discord. There they all are, and we're all painting. So a little bit more blue in there. And I bet you know the pattern now. We're going to reapply this lighter blue color. Smaller highlight, still dabbing it on, focused on our light direction, and keeping it going towards the light source. And once again, to the folks that were trying to message me on Twitch, I actually can only see one of the chat rooms at a time. So it's not that I don't want to chat with you, I just don't see it right away. And you're, of course, always welcome to join us on the Discord as well. That's absolutely free, easy to access. It's the Miniature Monthly Discord. And if you go on my Facebook page, the Hecatina Miniature Painting Studio Facebook page, there'll be a link to this class, and you're absolutely welcome to join in and ask questions and chat with us on the Discord. That's what it's for. Okay, so just irregularly and imprecisely painting those little dabs and dashes and dots to build up the highlights on the coat. And now, as I said, this is a very desaturated kind of faded blue, and I'm slowly building up a highlight color. So these shapes will be nice and visible, but we need to also start fading it. So I'm going to start adding in the creamy ivory to make faded highlights. Like the jacket's very weathered and weather beaten and rough and faded. And any fabric like that, those very matte fabrics with a texture on them, they look much lighter than you would think. It's much like kilts and those things. They don't look very, very dark. They look light colored, even if they're black, because all of that texture, every edge, every corner in the texture catches the light, and overall it looks very matte and it looks quite light. So that's kind of what we're doing with this coat as well. And I just realized I forgot to highlight the hat. So I'll do that now. We're going to highlight the hat. Same way, just very imprecise dots. Like that. And just remember not to cover the black that we did around the periphery of that hat at the start. There we go. Yeah, the eventual plan for these classes is to have a second person in the studio, both to handle the customers and to monitor the chat to make sure we don't miss anybody's questions. But unfortunately, that person is, we've been working it all out, but there's not quite available yet. And once we get that second person up and running, we will be able to host the class live in the studio at the same time and do both at once, as well as have people on Twitch and on Discord all painting along. And that's the aim, is to get lots of people painting along together. And I do want this to be a conversation. I really encourage people, if you've got questions, ask them. If you want to know why I'm doing something, or you see me do something that I didn't explain, like right now I'm doing a second highlight on the blue on the hat, and I added a little bit of that creamy ivory in to create this color, but I didn't say that I was doing that. There we go. There's the creamy ivory added in to make another lighter color. And you can see how it looks on the hat. But now we're going to do this on the coat. And remember I said the inside of his neck around there is going to look like wool. So we're going to do that a little bit differently in a minute. But for now, let's start adding some of these lighter blue dabs and dashes just on the side of these raised features that face the light. Just on the side facing the light. So not everywhere, and you're looking for rounded shapes, folded edges, that sort of thing. It will get this highlight, okay? Now this is going to look a bit like it's too light, and it is intentional because we're going to do a couple more highlights like this, but then we're going to do a dark glaze over all of it to dull it back down again, so you'll still be able to see the highlights, but they won't look quite as sharp or stark, okay? We'll just keep working our way around. Wiggly dabs and dashes and dot, kind of a regular texture to create that look. Now if I wanted to look perfectly smooth, all we would do was just do nice, straight, smooth brush strokes. Okay, and you get a very different look. This versus this, right? But this is not what I want for this guy. I want him to look beat up, weather beaten, like he's faced the Arctic wind many times, like he's had frostbite in Antarctica. Antarctica? I can't say that word for some reason today. And like the wind has cut through his clothing and frozen him many, many times. So he's seen the world and he's suffered. And he is ready to fight to keep other people from suffering the same. Arr, yar, there she blows. Never follow a narwhal into a snowstorm. I just made up that saying. That's not a real saying. Don't quote me on that. That's not like a Nova Scotia waterfront saying of the olden days. It's just Geoff being silly. Narwhal are so cool. I remember one time I flew into, where was it? Pond Inlet up in Nunavut. And there was narwhal all over the bay. So you could see the narwhal pods as you were flying into land in the town. It was so cool. And there was beluga, and there were walrus visible in the air as well. Really, really cool. All right, there he is. He's looking weather beaten now. And now on the back of his jacket, we need to do the same thing, but much, much less, because it's really on the dark side. So our highlights are only going to be really across the shoulders, a little bit down his back, but mostly focused towards this arm and towards the front. We don't want to overdo it and lose that idea that this side is in the shadow, this side is in the light. Okay? I do think I need to do a little bit more under that scruff of coat. There. Okay, now remember what I said, we're going to go lighter again. So we're add some more of that Reaper's Creamy Ivory into the mix. And we're going to do the whole thing all over again, focused on the light side. And so here we go. We're just going to do it again, but not cover quite so much area. Really focused towards the upper portion of each shape. And you can see I'm not being super careful or precise about it. But one thing I'm being careful not to do is to jam these highlights down in my darkest shadow area. This be a little bit too light for that, but I am not super concerned about a few of these little lines and dots and things missing and being a little bit outside of the area where I wanted them to, because these coats do kind of look like that anyway when they get all weather beaten. And I'm pretty sure on the docks in Greenland he's going to be getting blown all over the place. He also looked a bit like Captain Haddock from the Tintin comics. But this particular guy is not like Captain Haddock. He is not a total drunk who accidentally stumbles into things and basically just a kind of a... He's not a silly soul, let's put it that way. He is a very serious, hardened man of the sea. The kind of person that you would want to be the captain of the ship that's taking you through the Northwest Passage or sailing wherever. I remember one time I was on a flight in the Arctic, and the flight had a total hydraulic failure on takeoff. And the guy flying the plane was one of the most experienced bush pilots working in the north. And it's very reassuring when you're making an emergency landing to know that the pilot has that level of competence. All right, one layer lighter. And I'm going to keep going, make these dots even smaller, but I'm really looking for the edges of things this time. So like the edge of this, where the flap of the jacket comes across, the corners along the collar. These are the shapes I'm looking for to really bring them out. Make sure we're really focused on the light side. Now I know compared to the way I usually do this kind of stuff, where I'm like, paint this spot now, paint this spot now. For this sort of irregular, weather-beaten pattern, you want to be almost kind of random about it. You don't have a sense of what it's supposed to look like when you're done, but you don't need to be. It's more of a free kind of irregular, random approach rather than a very set, methodical approach. It's an organic material produced by manufacturing, but it's an organic material still, and it has that sort of look to it. All right, so now we're going to make a glaze. I'm going to go right back down to the bottom of this mixture where somehow there's a... There we go. Let's get that out of the palette. So this is this Templar blue with mostly black in it. And I'm going to make a glaze out of this color. So I'll drag that off to the edge again. I think I already had a very similar glaze when we did the beard. Look at that. My palette is almost dry. I use a little bottle to resupply with water when the palette starts to dry out. Keep it from... So that palette was full when I started the class, and it almost completely dried out. Gives you a sense of what it's like here today. Excellent conditions for beginner painting, because things dry so fast. There we go. And we put some more water in there, make it very thin. There's my glaze, okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that over the whole jacket. This is the plan. So, I'm going to start on the light side. Okay, I'm going to do it on the hat first. Let's do it up on the top of the hat. Basically going to go slowly across with the brush, and if you go slowly, the brush will feed paint into all the low spots, but also wipe paint off the raised spots. And I'm pulling from the light side towards the dark side to do this. I'll do the same thing on the front of the coat now. I'm going to start on that side of the lapel, and I'm going to pull from the light towards the shadow slowly, and it's going to let that paint flow in, but also wipe it off the raised areas. Make your way across. And because this is the color which is already in the shadows, any of that sort of coffee staining effect that you might normally see is going to be restricted to the shadows. And it's already this color, which means there won't be anything in the way of coffee stains to worry about. Same thing on the back of the collar, pull to the shadow. On the back of his jacket, same thing, we'll pull our way across. And that's going to smooth out a little bit of that deliberately patchy work that we did, leaving us with a nice smooth sort of irregular looking fabric. Okay, so we can compare now this area to this area. This looks harsher, this looks softer, but it's still got highlights facing towards the light, and that's what we're aiming for. So for this one, I think I'm going to pull my way across this way. So pull from the top down to the bottom. And I'm going to push my glaze up against the edge of the jacket there. And that's going to essentially give me a place to park the glaze off to the side. Park the glaze. I think that's a turn of phrase I learned from Aaron Lovejoy. I took many, many classes from Aaron. He's a wonderful painter. Great teacher as well. And I've learned a ton from him. If you ever have the chance to take a class from Aaron, or really anybody from Miniature Monthly, it's highly recommended. Don't hesitate, just do it. All right, that's going to do the job on that. I think the last thing we need to do right now, I'm going to let that dry for a while. We need to do the same thing on his pants, his trousers. So I'm going to grab the black Make a very, very thin mix of paint with the black. And we do the same thing now. I meant to do this earlier, but we're going to do it on his pants now. Exactly the same way. We go slowly across that, letting the black paint flow into the low spaces. You might have to wiggle the brush a little bit to get it to flow in some of those crevices. I just realized why it's not making me happy. Is I'm back to using that brush by mistake, the Winsor Newton one. Okay, but now you can see the difference between those two legs, right? That dulled down all the highlights that we had, smoothed them out a bit, but it still looks like it's painted black. And that's what we were aiming for. So that's the black glaze that has done that. All right, so let's do this one again. Accidentally picked up a bit of skin tone. We don't want that. So I'll do the other leg now, exactly the same way. Work my way from the top down to the bottom, letting the glaze go into, working the glaze into all those little low spots. Come across the highlights and pull the glaze back into the shadows, away from the light. And that'll help me avoid the coffee stains, the dreaded coffee stains. Coffee stains are caused by water and the way the paint dries when it's mixed with water. There we go. There's our ship's captain with his black pants. I like it. We let that dry. Now we're getting really close to the final details. So what am I going to do? I'm back to my ochre because we're going to do some highlighting on the wood and those pieces now. So we already painted the mug this ochre color as our base wood color and did a red wash, a wash of burgundy wine across it. So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to highlight again on the light side. So the top of the mug, I'm going to look for those individual bits of wood that I can grab and give a highlight to. Okay, to make those bits stand out. I'm going to do that all along the mug. Anywhere that I can reach that texture, I'm going to give it a little highlight. Just like that. And then I'm going to put this brush away, which is bothering me. And pick up the one I meant to pick up, which is my Rosemary & Co. Lovely, lovely Rosemary & Co. brush. And I'm going to grab creamy ivory. I'm going to mix some creamy ivory into the green ochre. And this, I'm going to do another highlight on the wood. So a little bit around the edge of the mug again. Then a little bits on the wood. Down. Really focused on the light side. And then the same thing, go and make it all the way down. Picking out those spots. Now the final step would ideally be a little bit of my favorite raw sienna ink. Raw sienna? I always get it backwards. Yes, transparent raw sienna, which would give it a nice warm yellowy look, which is a great color for highlighting wood. Now I'm going to take this same color and I'm going to highlight my map. I'm going to do brush strokes along the length of it, focused on the raised areas. Okay. And this is to highlight the map. Now you could make this whatever you want it to be. And you would change the look of it and give it some freehand patterns at the end to make some highlights on it. And there we go. I feel very lucky at this moment. My lovely wife and my wonderful dog have arrived to say hello. And always a good day when they visit the studio. There we go. And we need to let that dry for a moment. And while that's drying, we're going to do the collar of the sweater up in here. So all I'm going to do is some little dots on that texture on the sweater around his neck. Just hitting the raised areas. Now this is a fairly precise job. If you're not comfortable with that, don't worry about it, but it's something to aim towards as you do more painting. Sort of precision. And there's one other spot that shows, which is down here along his cuff. So I pictured that as being kind of a white, off-white wool sweater sticking out under the cuff there. And where else do we need this? We would do this on the collar of his jacket. So I'm going to grab a bit of black, some green ochre, and a dollop of creamy ivory. Just make a kind of a neutral gray-green mix. And that's going to be my first color for the corner of, for the wool inside his jacket. Okay, so where this is going to go, we've got this kind of liner of his jacket. I'm going to paint this with dots, like it's wool or fleece. Okay, and we're going to do several highlights of this because it brings out that shape and it makes it look like a natural fabric. Hello, little puppy. Fortunately, Penny does not usually jump up on the painting desk while I'm painting. So I would say she's much better than a cat in that regard. There we go. Collar of the coat starting to stand out. And there's a little bit of that collar visible in here on the other side. And we're going to put this color in there too. Just little dots and wiggly dabs. Just be careful not to cover over the shadow that we made around the skin when you do it. There we go. And now I bet you can guess what we're going to do next. We're going to grab creamy ivory, mix that into that color we just did, and make it much lighter. And we're going to do it again. Little tiny dots. To bring out the shape and the highlights. Now we don't have to cover everything we just did. We work mostly on the side facing the light, but this is to bring out the shapes. I just remembered that I'm going to my mother's house for supper today, which is awesome. I really like doing that after a long weekend of painting and classes and the losing games of Warhammer. It's always good to visit your mom if you can when you're sad after losing yet another game of Age of Sigmar. There we go. Okay. I like it. I really like it. Now, I'm going to do another layer of creamy ivory. I know, so much creamy ivory. And this layer is for specifically his map thing. We want that to look different from the other lighter colored objects. So we can give a highlight of this next lighter layer. And we're going to go one layer lighter with the creamy ivory. We're going to do straight creamy ivory on top of this. And I'm also doing the end of this to kind of bring out the fact that it's a roll. It's not just like a stick or something. It's a roll of paper. Really bring out the shape. Do that up here. Once again, employing the benefits of sound effects for the painting. There we go. Definitely looks like a different color from the other light colored objects on him. And I'm going to go straight creamy ivory now. And do another layer of highlight. Oh, this is not textured, this is just straight lines. So smooth highlights this time. Okay. And on the end, and on back, sorry, in here. There we go. And now we need a little bit of white. So I'm going to grab that solid white I was using earlier, mix it in with my mix of ivory. And I bet you know what's coming. Yes, we are going to do another layer of highlights on this map. Multiple layers of highlights, each one getting lighter and respecting kind of that rule of what the shape is. The shape of the highlights are dictated by the shape of the object you're painting. You can enhance the look. There we go. So now we're looking pretty good. I think the only thing I don't super like is that the mug is not as bright as it could be. So I'm just gonna do another layer of highlight on the mug. Particularly that edge. Just to kind of bring it up where it needs to be to match the lightness of the skin tone next to it, this area. Okay. There, that's more like what I wanted. Okay. There we go. He is basically done, except for a couple of little details. So the first detail we need to deal with that pipe. So for the pipe, I'm going to paint that pipe burgundy wine. The whole thing. Without getting burgundy wine on his face, of course. We don't want that. And if you were feeling ambitious, you could paint that as like a corncob pipe or a carved wooden pipe or something like that. I'm basically just going to make it look like a piece of ceramic. There we go. So there's my burgundy wine. And I am going to highlight that with the green ochre. I'm going to add some green ochre into that, which is going to make it like a really neutral, desaturated brown color. And that's going to be my first highlight on the pipe. I'm using colors that are already on my palette to make it easier for myself. And now I'm going to mix creamy ivory into that to make a highlight. Oh, I think I'll use a bit of this skin tone highlight, this tan skin highlight. That'll look good. I like it. And what I'm looking for now is the line of the pipe from his mouth to the, so this bit in here, to give that a highlight. And then I want a vertical highlight along the side of that so it's easier to see. Okay, and then I really want a distinct highlight on the ring at the top to make it really visible. Okay, and we're going to go one layer lighter. In fact, I'm going to go all the way just straight to creamy ivory right now and do another highlight. And this one should be quite small, and what that's going to do is make it look like the pipe's a little bit shiny. Okay, so I'm going to do the stem. There we go. And then the bowl. Like that. And now the ring at the top of the bowl. Give that a little bit of a highlight. There we go. And now we've got our pipe highlighted. Okay, I could keep going and going and going. Don't think I will, though. I think we're going to do three more little things. A little bit of stone gray. And with the stone gray, I'm going to highlight the band of his hat. Just one little line on that. A little bit around the back, too. So it's a bit more visible as a shape. And then I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight of that on the brim. So the brim of it becomes easier to see. There we go. That's enough. And then I think the last thing we need to do is a little bit of metallics. So we're going to get, I don't see my hone steel. Well, grab whatever metallic paint you want. Doesn't really matter. Pick one you like. There's a silver. And where's my dragon gold? Dragon gold. There it is. Ooh, tarnished brass. I'm going to use tarnished brass instead. Give it a good shake. I haven't used this one in a while. There we go. Put some on the palette. Nope, because it won't come out. Oh, gold paint everywhere. Clothes. Oh, well. I almost had a good day. There. Paint all over my hands. Monitors, cameras, everywhere. Okay, just give me a second to wipe up the mess. The gold paint is going everywhere. Fortunately, my pants were already dirty. Hopefully I didn't get it all over the Mini. Doesn't seem to be all over the Mini. I don't know where that loose drop of gold paint went. This is what happens when you paint Minis. Okay, fresh paper towel. There we go. I'm going to put aside my lovely brush there and pick up an old beat up one. Or synthetic, I should say. Use a synthetic to paint the metallics. And there we go. I'm getting this tarnished brass color, and this is going to be for the buttons. Ooh, you know what? I could use this on the mug as well. That would make sense. All right, so I'm going to start with the buttons. Now, see, I got gold paint all over me. Start by putting a little bit of this tarnished brass, on each of those ring shapes. Now, the rings have a really high raised texture. So I'm going to just gently lower the brush and let that texture do all the work for me. By gently lowering the brush onto it, the raised piece hits the brush first, and I don't have to do much work to highlight those. Now, that worked out pretty good. And I'm just being slow and careful because I'm nearly done this Mini. Here we go. Here we go. There's his buttons. And I'm going to do the bands around this mug with the same color. So this way. Like that. And it's going to look very dull. I remember I said about the strap being, the handle being visible from the top. There it is in there. This is going to be a brass handle. A little bit of brass paint on there. And on the bottom. There we go. Visible under there. There he is. We got our buttons. We got our... Ooh, look at those tiny little buttons on his cuff. I don't know if I can manage that. Let's see if I can do it. Probably not. So you see my brush tip has a little bit of a curve to it. So I'm going to try to dab that little curved bit okay, onto the buttons on his cuff, so that I don't have to do too much work to clean it up. Now, if I made a mistake, I just go back to the blue and do it again. But that seems to have worked reasonably well. And there doesn't seem to be any buttons visible on the other sleeve, which is a bit odd. If they were visible, they would be in there behind the paper, I guess. So don't need to worry about that. But there might be, yeah, there is. There's a bit of brass at the side of his cap. Little brass button there. Now, as a beginner, you might not be comfortable doing that, and that's totally fine. But if you try it and it makes a mess, you can just come back in with your black and paint up to the edge of it with your black. There we go, a little bit of brass there on the edge. And I would say he's pretty much done. Now, the one thing we didn't do yet on that brass, and this is the last thing we're going to do, the brass needs to be kind of, it doesn't look very shiny, right? So what we're going to do, we've got a little bit of a black glaze we already made. So I'm going to grab that black glaze. And I'm going to go over each of these buttons carefully with a little bit of the black glaze. Fill back in the center with the black glaze. And that's going to increase the relative contrast between inside and outside and I'm going to re-highlight the brass after this dries. So the black is going to create like a dark shadow around the brass. When it dries, the brass is going to look dull. And then when I redo the highlight on the brass, that extra contrast will make the brass look extra shiny. And I think extra shiny is what I want on the brass buttons, but maybe not on the brass mug. There we go. Just let the mug kind of do its thing. Sorry, I started playing. We'll stop playing. We'll just let that do what it's going to do. Let it dry. Shouldn't take long, and if you look close, you'll be able to see it go from light, or like sort of reflective looking, to matte as it dries. Oh, it needs a bit of touch up there. A little bit more brass paint on that than I intended. There we go. And now, how are we looking? Not looking too bad. We're going to paint. I'm going to grab a little bit of that silver that I put on there. And I'm going to use that super shiny silver to highlight the brass, and we'll call that done. So a little bit of dot up there. That's enough. A little bit on the edge of that brass mug. Not too much, just a touch. And I'm not doing all of it, just where the light, our natural light source coming this way, would create a highlight on the edge of that mug. There we go. And then same thing on the buttons. I'm not going to highlight the whole button. These buttons being round shapes, the highlight is going to be facing our light direction. So our light's this way and high up, so it's up here somewhere. So I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of a silver highlight on each of those buttons facing kind of towards the light source. And that's going to make them look really shiny. There we go. Super shiny buttons. Metallic paint. All good. And there is our guy. So from there, it's just basing, paint the rim of the base, all that kind of good stuff, and you're done. So if you have questions, I would encourage you think about what you might want to ask and let me know. And I am going to do a few little bits of extra detail for no other reason than to give you time to ask your questions. And so like I'm going to do a little bit of a color on the base. really what I'm doing is hoping that anybody who wants to will take the time to drop a photo, type more questions on the Twitch. Let's see, any more questions there? Nope, not right now. And just kind of generally finishing the mini up. The last thing I'll do is put a little bit of black around the rim of the base, so the base looks finished. Get some very strong shadows on the go back there. Maybe a little too strong, but you know, I kind of like dramatic lighting, so I'm kind of okay with that actually. There we go. There's the stuff he's standing on. We've got strong shadow, strong highlights, and I'm going to put that final black rim on the base. So I'm not sure exactly when this one will go up, probably about a week, assuming there's no issues with the recording. And as I said, you are welcome to ask me questions. You can send me questions as a message in the Discord, or just tag me in any channel in the Discord. I check it pretty much every day. And if you tag me with a question, I will do my best to answer. You can put photos in the peer review channel on the Discord, and I'm sure one of the very friendly painters out there in the channel will be happy to give you some pointers. It's a friendly group, so yeah, feel free to paint and post and ask questions. And I'm just messing around with a few last details. I'm going to be signing off pretty soon, so really last chance for questions in this session. There he is. Not too bad. I could have done a better cleanup job on the mold lines and stuff on the sculpt, but it's a lesson learned for me. Be more careful. My dog is looking at me like, yeah, Dad, that's enough. Stop talking. Time to go home. And yep, that's it. So again, thanks for tuning in. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks for participating, and I hope we will see you for the next one.